topic that I really like to talk about is how we start wrapping up key elements of how we go into a new year, how we start to update what's happening, take a little bit of a breeze at the past and a little bit of a breeze at the future as to what are some of the things we need to be keeping an eye out on. So we've broken them down into 5 major areas that we'll be talking about today, and we'll be delving down into what are some of the things you may want to think about from a programmatic standpoint, in addition to what are some statistics that you may see out there. So we'll first begin with what I call the easy one, preventive maintenance. If there's anything that people know in conversations with us, we always talk about is PM, because we know from a sense that it's the whole stitch in time saves 9. We really harp on this a lot because we know what the benefits will be. We define PM as scheduling your maintenance as an effort to keep all your assets functioning properly for as long as possible, keeping them in the best practices, and really try to extend the life cycle of what those assets and components may be. You know, many people, we don't have to explain it too hard for people that are in maintenance and repair and operations and physical plant. They know they don't want to put off till tomorrow what they can get done today, but often they find themselves in a reactive mode. They're constantly firefighting, rushing to go out and correct a breakdown or reduce an issue from becoming something bigger. So we all know emergency and corrective maintenance, it takes more time. Certainly takes more money because there's about a 1 in 4 difference, that 4 times the cost to fix something that's an emergency versus 1 amount to basically prevent it. It causes a lot of disruption, it causes stress, it can affect business continuity. So we always try to explain it to people that may not really understand preventive maintenance, that it's like your car or it's like your teeth. You know, if you get a cavity, it's going to eventually become very serious, and you may even have to have an extraction. With your car, if you don't change the oil, eventually you have a breakdown. So conceptually, it's really not a huge thing, but it's really a matter of people putting in the time and the money. But it ends up creating this big avalanche that over the last 5 years, there's been an increase in deferred maintenance. And really it's been for the last 20 years that's been out there. But what we've seen in the last 5 years is that an 18% increase has occurred, and about $500 billion in deferred maintenance is existing in educational institutions out there. It used to be $5,000 per student. That was the number I heard back in the early 2000s. Now it's approaching $6,500 per student is where these overdue maintenance needs have risen. They're creating these capital emergencies that are happening out there. And also, we know from prevention that not only can it keep these costs from skyrocketing as they have been doing, and anyone who's been looking at reports for the last several years for, kind of the report card for America's infrastructure, schools usually go about a D+. They used to be a D-, now they're, or a D, and then they went now to a D+, but they're still in the D range. That these things have been snowballing over the last several years, several decades, that the infrastructure is really starting to take a hit. But with prevention, that's when we start seeing that there's a reduction in the amount of emergency work. Basically, you cut it in half, and you also cut the cost by 1/3, that if you can say, it's not just about HVAC and roofing, but even on doors and hardware, we can cut those costs down by about 1/3 in what those work costs may be, to put more money back into capital to be able to spend it on other things that need to be spent. So prevention is where we always say, you know it needs to be done. You might need the numbers to prove that it needs to be done, but what is next? And this is something that is now finally coming to fruition after the last probably 20 years that I've been going into this business, is we're now seeing IoT, Internet of Things, and predictive maintenance finally starting to come to a new horizon. So building control systems have certainly been around for decades. We've definitely seen the ways that you can say we want to see what the temperatures of the rooms are, we want to see what the security access codes are, and any of the volume of air that's flowing. But now we're starting to see it expand in a lot of new different ways. So essentially, we know that if we can keep things running smoothly, that's great. But now the Internet of Things and predictive maintenance, it's really becoming a game-changing approach with how we approach maintenance and facility management, because you want to have an effective system in place to tackle those recurring tasks. But wouldn't it be great to have a way to say, instead of me changing this every 3 months or every 2 years, what if data was telling me that it's time to change the filter because it needs to be changed, not because it's been 3 months, that the belt is starting to fail? Maybe it can let me know that that's about to happen. Refrigerative systems. If I've got $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 worth of food that's sitting in a lot of my refrigeration system, I kind of want to know if that's starting to go on the fritz. So if we can start getting a better sense of what's happening and do things because they're needed, not because it's just a scheduled time frame or a guesstimate or things fall through the cracks, that's where PDM differs from PM, is that it's that level of intricacy, a certain level of customization. So PM is great, but there is an amount of guesswork that goes in that PDM is starting to solve. So your PM system says your roof, or your capital forecast says your roof should last 30 years as long as you're doing PM. And if you're not doing PM, this is a little tidbit I heard from Tremco a few years ago, if you're not doing preventive maintenance, a 20-year roof really lasts about 12 years. But if we're following PM, and especially on equipment, we start incorporating PDM and IoT, that's when we can really start extending those life cycles, because we all know, yes, the roof is supposed to last 20 years. I'm expected to make it last 26 to 30 years because that is the nature of what we have to do in this industry. So IoT, this the real buzz. It's also, we're hearing it as IIoT in the industrial era. So it's not just about my fridge can tell me something, my dishwasher can tell me something. It's really expanding what's going on. My 4-year-old now talks to my television to say, I want to see My Little Pony. And boom, My Little Pony comes up. It's just crazy what's been happening the last couple of years. The fact I can track a pizza on my phone for the last decade is amazing, and my phone can check my security system, and I can let someone in while I'm 20 miles away. These types of things are really becoming more and more prevalent. You're going to see some amazing technologies come out in the next few years, especially in the local area where I'm at. Cree has been doing some amazing things with lighting technologies, and being able to control things from there and being able to save energy at the same time. So translating this to the educational industry, this allows us to accomplish and analyze things with minimal human intervention. Now, I say minimal. I would never say no human intervention. I don't care how good a technology is. You need to have someone who's paying attention to it, understands what that data means, and make that final call. But if I can get data immediately or in close to real time as possible and understand this needs to be resolved, that's where it's a huge, huge benefit. Now, we understand that it doesn't come with an operational upgrade. We understand that there's some things that are happening out there that it takes a lot of I guess you would say it takes a lot of capital investment. It takes a lot of human investment. We need to be able to look at how these things will benefit us, not just on a cool factor, but we need to look at these things from how is this actually going to be helping us down the road. So PDM is great, but make sure it fits what you're dealing with. But once you do find what it is that works with you, that's where you really want to go with it. So we believe we have a poll here. So talking about IoT and the Internet of Things and predictive maintenance, we want to take a poll here. So let's see, Joe and Kurt, let's see where our poll is at here. There we go. So let's set up a poll. So being on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, how much do you think IoT or predictive maintenance will impact your operations at this point? So looking at things like HVAC has definitely been around a long time, but now we're seeing a lot more capabilities of what these controls and these items are starting to bring into it. So I'm going to give about another 10 seconds on this and give you a chance to give some answers to it. So I'm going to give 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and go. All right. So we'll have a chance to see that poll there. And so thanks for everyone who submitted that in. But it's going to be a pretty amazing what you see in the next few years. We've been experimenting in-house with a lot of items. So being able to see what it is that we can even do with a lot of this technology that's being out there, I think you're going to see that this industry is really about to explode in how it deals with it. And we do see that the majority of people are seeing that there is about a scale of 1 to 5, 4 is where a lot of people are sitting at. So great feedback on it. So preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance, those things can affect something that we want to be able to control. But there's also an element that's not always in our control, and that is when people come in to use our facilities, a people factor that comes in. So let's talk about the topic of cost recovery, and we're going to have a poll for this. So our next poll is going to be, how often are you looking at upgrading, or have you upgraded any of the usage fees, policies, especially the cost structure around people coming in to use your facilities? So is it something that you're reviewing annually, biannually? Is it every multiple years? We're saying every 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. How often do you look at what you charge for groups coming in to use your facilities? So we're going to give about another 20 seconds. And I've heard everything across the board. You know, we've given quarterly, but not everyone does it quarterly. Some may say, well, we haven't done it since 1994. So that's where I would go with the multiple years or never. But want to give people a chance, maybe 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to get your answer in. All right. So let's look at how we are doing on our poll here. And let's see if we get our results. Will be up in just another second or so. So while that's pulling up, there is no real wrong answer as long as you know what the answer is. So being able to see essentially what it is that's out there in your policy. So most people are in a yearly basis, which is great. We're seeing some nice advancements in that area. So let's talk about cost recovery as a whole. This is something I know I've been very passionate about for the last 10 years in really trying to get a lot of the awareness around this topic, and we've been putting numbers to this. This number used to be that it was $70 per student on average to run an event. It used to be 60. Now it's more along the lines of 70. And it used to be that the average cost recovered was about $15 to $16 per student. Now we've seen an increase, luckily going along with that higher cost, that it's about not quite $19 per student that's recovered. We know that budget is valuable. I mean, you just wouldn't let money go down the drain, but this is one of the areas where money is slipping out through the side. It's going out over the edge, because what's happening is when events are happening outside of your normal educational curricular routine, those events are also requiring some of the same resources: utility, people, cleanup, supplies. And what we're seeing is, because there's not always a good grasp, or we're so involved in our community and after hours and weekend events that we have to keep these buildings and these components running all the time. At a time-wise standpoint, we've seen that the average K through 12 will have about a little over, not quite 1,100 hours of events outside of their normal operating schedule. Basically, every weekend of the year, you're running your building from 3:30 at night to midnight. And I've seen in many cases, people are literally, that's figuratively, what we're saying, till midnight. I've seen people do that literally, where they will have their buildings running full capacity until 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, because they may not know who's in the building. They may not have a good grasp on being able to manage where they put people in those facilities. It's just a safeguard to make sure that anyone who's in the building in those times has lighting, they have heat or air conditioning and so on. So some people literally have their buildings running till 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So looking at those costs, we can see where some of this money is lost. Now, also what we looked at was evaluating and polling people and getting a lot of our surveys. About a quarter of people are not scratching the cost of cost recovery, or scratching the surface of cost recovery. Just a little over half, about 57%, are recovering some level of cost. 15% are recovering most, or they're breaking even on recovering back those costs. 3% are actually recovering more than what they're spending out to maintain those programs, and they're actually using it to fund other programs. We don't really call this effort of pulling in and invoicing people, getting that money into the door, back into the door. We call it cost recovery for a reason. We don't call it a profit center. It's really more or less to make sure that if you're spending what you're spending, allowing people coming into your facilities, that you actually recover that cost back. Because not only do you have to have some sense of management on it, you've got to get that cost back into place. Here, many people say they rob Peter to pay Paul. You know, they're spending money out of their operational budget to let people in, but when the cost is recovered, it's not always recovered back fully, and then sometimes it may go to a different funding source altogether, maybe the general fund, for example. So what we say is put some things in place to really help out with what's going on. And here are some of the steps we want to follow from a cost recovery standpoint. Know what you've got going on. So you know you're going to be spending money on energy and utilities. Especially for people that are publicly funded, there's a real fine line of what happens there, that because if you are publicly funded, many people think you should be available for public use. People don't always understand that puts a strain on budgets that are already thin, or how much it costs to actually run these events. So you want to get a lot of these facts into it, like energy and utilities. You're going to be spending electricity, water. You're going to be dealing with people that have to set up and break down these events. You have to put it on paper. You can't guesstimate what these costs are, and you certainly don't want to short yourself with recovering those costs back in. So many times there is a case that you have to get these numbers in place, but once you do and start collecting these facts and figures, worst case, just document it. If you can't recover it because the policy hasn't been updated or it's a big process, at least know what these costs are going to be. You've got custodial and security that's dealing with this, again, for the setup, the breakdown, also the personnel that are managing and coordinating these events to make sure that everything is dotted and crossed and so on. You need to have someone make sure the occupants are safe and the occupants aren't breaking things in the buildings. And then all the cleanup before and after the event has to occur as well. You also have IT and audio-visual setups for many groups as well that they need to know what's happening. You've got materials like toilet paper, paper towels, cleaning materials for the custodial personnel to work with. You're going to have wear and tear on the buildings. It's not that groups are going to come in and necessarily damage the buildings, but if something gets used, I mean, it's going to get worn out. There's going to be scratches, gouges. People don't know how to properly work equipment. They're using it, so it's going to just naturally wear these things down. So you can expect probably about 2% of the value to be lost maybe every year or so on the value of those assets because of just normal wear and tear. So these are things that you want to think about in your cost structure. So when you start setting up a fee structure, here's a typical example we'll see many people look at where they'll say, we break it down into 3 or 4 categories. When it's student groups, for example, or it's groups like our instructors, our staff, typically there's a no charge. There's a no charge scenario. Just you've got first right to use the building, which that needs to be in your policy. Who has first rights to use your facility, then which ones get charged for them. Then working with groups like, okay, this is a nonprofit group in our community or is affiliated with us. If we do charge them anything, it's a very minimal fee, just something very basic. Might be just a $5 fee. It could be an hourly charge that's very minimal. Then getting into, these are groups that we're going to be charging a larger fee for. We definitely want to charge for custodial cleanup, security, equipment rentals, other types of recovery fees. And then we may do a market rate for these other groups that are out there. So category 4 might be, you don't fit in these other 3 categories, so we're going to bill you X amount of dollars. You also want to look at what it is in your community. What are other facilities? Like, is there a VFW? Is there an art center or YMCA? Are they charging anything? If so, what are they charging? Because you want to be competitive without being competitive. You want to be market right. So making sure that you're not gouging and you're not losing anything at the same time. Find that healthy balance to say we are just as well positioned in the community to provide a place for the community groups to come in and use our facilities without losing too much or without trying to undercut them at the same time. You also want to automate whatever processes you can. Again, this goes back to the IoT argument that I say is you want to automate as much as possible as long as you're also watching it as much as possible. It's really about leveraging your time to make sure things are not falling through the cracks. So one group I was working with about several years back, they were recovering about $500,000 a year. They're a large organization. They were getting in about $500,000 a year for people coming in and using their facilities. Then once they switched away from a paper-based invoice process to electronic, they went from $500,000 to $800,000 within a year. As they refined their processes, took more things to automation to where they were monitoring the process versus being very hands-on and manual, no change in their rates. It was $1.1 million a year within a 2 to 3 year period. Just by automating processes, going in, checking to make sure that the automation had done well, sending out the invoices, making sure that nothing was falling through the cracks on the collection process of it, making sure that things were going into place. No double bookings, no double billings. Being able to look at key performance data to keep track of what was being paid in, what groups had them, did they have an expired insurance policy, keeping track of all the emails and phone calls and other communications that were going in. But then also, I think we're seeing now more people are getting into the promotion of events. So being able to say, I have an event, I want the public to be able to come in and look at it, maybe buy tickets, definitely have the awareness that's out there. We're definitely seeing this more in the university systems, but some of the districts and the private schools and independent schools are jumping in on this bandwagon as well to say, we not only want to automate the management of the process, we want to put more out there as a promotion that we are part of the community. We have these groups coming in, and we want you to come and attend these events. Hey, maybe buy a ticket or buy some swag while you're on our campus as well. So being able to automate those processes for cost recovery and event management is another key element. And event management, as we mentioned, starts affecting things like your energy and utilities. So let's have our next poll, and this is going to be related to energy. This is one of my fun ones here. You'll hear me throw in a couple of examples. But what is the biggest obstacle that you're seeing when you're trying to get buy-in for energy conservation, recycling, any types of programs to reduce usage and reduce costs? And it doesn't matter who's in your facilities, whether it's students, staff, faculty, other employees, people coming in, is what do they typically say, or what is your impression of why you can't really get some things off the ground, or what would be some hurdles you could remove? So it's not my bill, not my problem. You know, they just come in to use the facility. They don't worry about paying their electric bill like they would at home, or this is my personal space. This is my 800 square foot world. You know, I'm in charge of it. This is my place. Or, hey, in order to have a comfort level, I've got to have these space heaters because it's not comfortable here, or I've got to have this mini fridge because the staff break room doesn't have enough for me. You know, I want to bring in a microwave. I want to bring in a coffee pot because the student lounge does, or the staff lounge, or even the student lounge, doesn't really fit what it is that we need. Or I don't get it. Yeah, I just don't understand what's the big deal. So let's have our poll results up there. So that's going to be calculated. And we did threw in another. Wow, this is a healthy balance on board, but it's the middle one. I need these space heaters. I need this mini fridge. My favorite, though, was a wok. I don't know why someone thought they needed to have a wok in their room. Maybe they were using it as a part of their lesson, but you know, I would say they were probably using it for their own personal use. But the other thing is we'll see people actually use tricks when it comes to energy. So we know that there's tricks that go both ways, but certainly what we know in the spending is that the average building is wasting about a third of its energy. And when we're looking at cost, energy is typically in the operationals realm is the second most expensive item. Dealing with the personnel, and benefits, that's number one in the operational world. But energy is number two. And just by doing little things along the way, and knowing what you're spending is really the primary area. That can save you about 5% annually. Some people say even up to 15% if you know what you're spending and where you're spending it and what you're spending it on. That just awareness starts really pulling these things down. But we're going to talk about a few of these little low-hanging fruits that are out there as well that you can start looking at energy conservation and cost reduction from an energy standpoint. So let's take a look at what we call the 5 C's of energy. We're going to start first with the eyeball clarity. You cannot improve what you don't know. You know, the phrase I heard is, you don't know what you don't know. So you've got to get in the know. Understand the numbers behind your current energy approach. Tracking bills, tracking equipment, looking at meters, something that's got a quality energy management system behind it to help you stay on top of where your consumption is. Then start getting the cost avoidance. Really, in my world, in my thinking, it's usage avoidance. You can't always control cost, but certainly if you can do things to control usage, that affects your cost. So it is cost avoidance the way that most people define it. But I always look at usage avoidance in my personal view, because once you've got that data, you start looking at where the inefficiencies are. Where are things that you can fix before they get worse? Is it a mechanical issue or is it a personnel issue? You don't know where your program needs tightening up unless you know that you're tracking it and where those anomalies are. Then getting into conservation. Once you've got visibility into your usage, into your spend, into your bills, looking at ways you can conserve energy and cut costs. Also, the money that you could save in that area can go towards other resources, new staff, new equipment, uplifts, retrogrades. You know, looking at where you can start putting those dollars that you're conserving to reinvest them somewhere else. Being in compliance, making sure you stay informed and you're in alignment with any government regulations, any ordinances on energy, knowing what's happening in your state. You know, also looking at communication is, are you in communication with things like the state, with your power provider? Because once you identify issues, you're going to want to communicate with your team, your providers, and anyone that you can get in contact with what your ordinance and regulations are. So having data, having reports, having the communications, that's essential to communicate the value of your energy plans to your key stakeholders, to your community. But also looking at where you can communicate to people in your facilities to say, did you know that we're spending X amount of dollars on this that could have been spent elsewhere? Maybe even also having a little competition. But whereas the communication with some of your energy providers in your states is sometimes they have rebates that you may be able to take advantage of, but also we've heard in cases where people have said, we are being billed for something like a meter that doesn't exist anymore. That thing has been gone for 2 years. Why are we still paying for this? So these elements all work together in a format that really all make sure that you've got a good foundation of an energy policy. So let's take a look at where these breakdowns, very similar to what we did with cost recovery and event management, where are some of the breakdowns of the elements that we can look at? The first one being your benchmarks, is you've got to know what your baseline is. You got to know what your foundation on usages and costs are. If you're going to develop an energy plan or energy policy, some of those benchmarks are going to be key into that. You also need to have what your policy is going to be on things like people bringing in those mini fridges, people bringing in the woks. You know, people when they're bringing in a fridge, they're not bringing in something that's going to be Energy Star compliant. They're probably bringing in the fridge their kids had in college 10 years ago, which probably might still be Energy Star compliant, but not necessarily. So what is the policy on that going to be? Also looking at where your goals are. You can't really go forward with a good mindset and a good vision without the goals that would get you there along the way. And you want to start earnest. You want to start modest. Early success will help create and sustain momentum. So you want to make sure that any goals you have are set on measurable metrics. Choose a percentage you want to show as a reduction, as a simple metric based off of your current energy bills. Let people know how well you're doing on that. Build the momentum to say, we have already saved 4% this year. Let's keep that going and we'll do things like maybe set up a pizza party. You know, we'll give you recognition. So keep track of how you're doing and communicate that with other folks in the know to let them know what's happening. If you have a way to look at tracking your Energy Star scores, that's one of the more popular and well-known items that are out there in the whole energy business. Is what is our rating? Are we a 100? You know, are we not just compliant, but are we just doing incredibly? And they'll actually give plaques for a lot of the buildings. You can get some really great press out there that if you have a high Energy Star score, that's good PR for your community. Also, trying to get the buy-in and the exposure is big. If you were looking at a 10% savings in your energy consumption, what would that mean to you? People that don't have a context without making it relevant, it's really hard to say. But if that 10% is translated into a new custodian, a new security staff, you know, it's translated into devices for the classroom, the instructional environment, more after-school activities, that's when it becomes real. You have to put something visual around it. People don't just say, oh, yeah, you saved 10 grand. Ooh, yeah, that's awesome. Put something that is tangible out there as well, and the community can rally around it versus, you know, a percentage number that they may not quite understand. And also, don't underestimate the power of a simple behavioral audit. People don't know what they're wasting. A great picture I saw a few weeks ago was actually a utility company saying that people were dumping their grease down the drain, and that was actually causing clogs. People didn't understand that. They just thought, well, I can just dump my grease down the drain. But what they did was they took a picture of a pipe that was just clogged completely in fat and grease, because people didn't understand that when you pour that grease down the drain, yeah, it's hot when it goes in, but once it goes to the street, it actually cools down, and it then starts collecting in the pipe. People don't understand the big picture. So they don't understand their behaviors until they get a chance to see them in action and get a chance to change them. Also, use students whenever possible. You know, in a K-12, there's nothing more powerful than an 8-year-old with a badge. You know, certainly on a college campus, the students are major voices in how things can be done from a competitive standpoint and a utility saving standpoint, because they've been raised around it. And they know what some of these behavioral changes are, and they can help spread that message to say, if we can teach our teachers, if we can help our parents, if we can get the professors involved and the students involved, then more people can be drawn into that program. They can help with training. They can help the education. I'll say also involve custodial staff, because they're in those facilities all the time. Get everyone involved with it to help translate what this will mean as a greater achievement, and I think it also builds a level of camaraderie at the same time. Also, there's many actions that can be taken to yield immediate returns. Small energy measures like getting rid of those fridges. One person, he said what he did was he spent, I think, 17 or 18 grand redoing one of the lounges. So that way, people that were bringing in those amenities from home had a nice lounge to go to. So that $17,000 investment saved him probably around $40,000 in energy over a certain time period. Looking at replacing bulbs, keeping doors closed, windows closed, and so on. Also, if there's any other things you can do with performance contracts, uplifts, redesigns, rebuilds, retrogrades, retrofits, anything that can be done in-house, trying to get those things into place, and then making sure you have your preventive maintenance and any types of programs for a comprehensive maintenance program into your plan. Those things can bring thousands of dollars back into your house, into your hands, versus did you have to bring in a third party like a contractor to work with. So look at where you can do things in-house. And also, your energy plans should, going back to the beginning, include preventive maintenance and your long-term capital planning, because those dollars are reciprocal. They will come back around. Also, when you have those goals, look for ways to celebrate the successes. Make sure that you're broadcasting them. You know, make sure you take the time to evaluate, what did we do? What worked? What didn't work? Many people may be familiar with Deming that says do, plan, study, act. That's going into a process. What did we do? How did it work? Should we continue it? Do we have to tweak it? And just keep that cycle going. If you have an energy manager, get them involved with people to look at the metrics, assess them. Are there phases of a project or phases of our energy vision that we want to look at? It never ends. It is continuous, because that is just the nature that once you keep those successes going, you want to keep them going. Now, we're going to shift gears. So looking at things like energy and looking at things like preventive maintenance and health and safety is where I start to see an extension of it, because what you're doing is you want to make sure you have your energy run or your equipment running efficiently. It's going to save time and money, but it's also going to be looking at how your indoor air quality is looking. Preventive maintenance on things like doors and windows starts getting into health and safety as well. So let's take a look at our next poll here. So when we're looking at the health and safety aspect, what do you think the quality of your facilities, how does that impact your student and your faculty performance? So I know a few years ago there's been a few things that have come out where there were studies basically saying the lighting and the air conditioning, the heating systems have an effect on student performance. But we want to also get your take on it. So that was definitely a study we've seen done out there, but let's get your take on it. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up this poll in about the next 5 seconds. Give everyone a chance to weigh in on this topic. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, we'll close the poll, give that a chance to pull up. So scale of 1 to 5, 1 being none, 5 being a lot, how much do you think the quality of facilities impacts student and faculty performance? Faculty performance being another key word. People don't always really recognize that we want to keep and retain quality faculty and staff. So we want to keep those people coming back. So good, 4. That's pretty well in line with what we've seen people look at. So good. I am glad to see people are in agreement that it is an effect on it. I've actually seen one group in Texas, they actually equated it to their graduation rate. All the major projects they were doing, they looked at how it affected their graduation trends over time as well. So why is health and safety big? Well, let's take a look at just some basic items. Our kids and our students are constantly in our facilities. Basically, in a district, it's a work week that our kids are in our facilities. In many cases, they're in there longer than that. But our average is 35 hours a week is when a child in a K-12 is going to be spending in a school environment. College students outside of the dorm, they're in an instructional building at least 20 hours a week. So they're going to be in classrooms, they're going to be in the library, they're going to be in labs, whether it's a science lab or it's an audiovisual or an IT lab. They're going to be in our facilities all the time. So we want to make sure we have a place that is healthy and safe for them to learn. Because what it comes down to, many of you may have heard of Maslow. If you're not familiar with it, this is the hierarchy of needs. It basically says this is how one's basic biological and physiological needs have to be met before they can thrive, before they can perform creatively, before they can reach their full intelligence potential. At the bottom level, I need to be fed and I need to be warm. Then I need to be safe. Then I need to feel like I'm accepted. Then I need to feel like people are accepted of me. Then I feel like I am self-fulfilled. So what we've seen is that studies are students score 5 to 17 times higher on a test when in high-functioning facilities. So let me pull up my slide here. Didn't navigate to the next. Here we go. There we go. There we go. There's our Maslow hierarchy needs. So 5 to 17 times higher on tests when they're in high-functioning facilities. Older facilities that have issues like poor heating, ventilation, bad lighting, crowding, excessive noise bleed over between rooms, those create a difficult environment and atmosphere for students to get comfortable in, much less being able to prosper. Children, teens, those with learning impairments, they will often struggle the most to acclimate to those types of environments. So making adjustments to your school's atmosphere, it does take time, it takes thought, it does take money, but don't feel like you have to do everything at once. Get in where you can fit in. Start slow. Create a plan. Make gradual improvements over time. take into account that by optimizing the first 3 trends, that base of the pyramid, you're going to go a long way to improve this. And then address the 4 common areas that struggle by first looking at some of these areas. Do we feel like the kids are comfortable? Do we feel like they can thrive? Can they see well? Then being able to look at where we can remove any of those barriers. So Maslow's hierarchy need is big. So let's look at some of the areas we can make those improvements. First one is lighting. So things like your LED bulbs, for example, that's one of the big trends. Changing out ballasts being another. But the improper lighting issues that we've seen out there, those are a huge distraction. They're a detriment to student learning. Lighting the classroom should be high enough for students to see optimally, but not glaring. It has to be natural enough to be soothing, getting the right lumens in place. Also, looking at where we can look at anything like window film to allow or mimic natural daylight with the bulbs. What can we bring in with natural daylight to be able to look at how can we reduce glare without losing the natural sunlight. So look into window films and check out some of the vendors that are working in that area. Also, noise being another area, again, looking at noise bleed over. I know definitely with lighting, there were humming when I was a student, and then you have the air conditioning that when I was a student. If you're looking at ways to look at how you can cure it, you can't always cure the noise, but certainly indoor air quality is one of the biggest areas that you want to look at. But if you can, check your HVAC system. If it's old or ill-functioning, see what you can do to retrofit or replace that over time, because that's affecting the students. It has to work for them, not against them. So modern energy-efficient models save on energy usage, but they're also designed to reduce the amount of noise. Check the efficiency of the assets. That may not be the only thing that's disrupting the classrooms either. HVAC is the primary culprit, but there's often other equipment that's nearby, vending machines, fridges, copiers, anything that carries noise. A lot of times our hallways, they're hard surface, they're gonna bounce noise around. So look at where all of the noise issues are. If you can't replace HVAC now, maybe you could look at things like, is there a vending machine that's humming very loudly down the hall that we can work with the vendor about replacing that, or in some way maybe move it a little further down the hall. Now let's also look at, in relation to HVAC, also temperature from the roofing standpoint and your HVAC. It's hard for anybody to focus when they're sweating or when they're shivering because the temperatures aren't regulated well. Minors and those with sensitivities to certain things in the atmosphere, they have the worst time. You know, if it's too hot, people get drowsy. If they're too cold, yeah, they're awake, but they're shivering. They're not really paying attention. They're uncomfortable. They're having trouble doing their best. So upgrade your HVAC, yes, that is one of the things you want to look at, but also making sure that it is an energy efficient unit. But also look at the roof as well. So the roof that you see on the right is a cool roof. So that's really looking at how things can be reflected, what things are going to be absorbed in the wintertime versus bounce in the summer. The guys on the left to the right is a cool roof. The left is cool guys on a roof. Look at where you can assess your equipment and your roof to see where those high solar reflectance capabilities are, reducing those cooling loads. And also just from a maintenance standpoint, making sure you get that full 20, 30 to 50 years, depending on the type of roof. Make sure you get that full life cycle out of that as well. All right, so now also looking at where you can have your carbon dioxide, you know, people look at their VAV boxes, anything that they're looking at with their ventilation systems, many of the small pieces that may be out there. You know, that's really where you want to look at is the ventilation is in addition to your HVAC equipment. Looking at things like your indoor air quality, when you're looking at mold, leaks, you're also looking at your ventilation system with the dust that's happening out there. Those things can increase student illness. They can increase absenteeism. That affects things like your graduation rate. And that's why this group in Texas, they looked at graduation rate, that they had put in many of these upgrades in place. So these trends affected energy, the cost, and the graduation rate. You know, that was over a 3-year period, and they did see upticks in all of those areas. Now, those types of reports take a view of where data comes in, and this is a term that's been coming up for the last couple of years and really taking off is this term business intelligence. which is a way of saying we're looking at a large amount of data in multiple views, in multiple visuals. So let's take a look at where business intelligence is coming in. So the concept is you're looking at data for business to make an intelligent decision. This is one of our favorite topics that we've really talked about over the last 15 years, but really the last 3 to 4 years, we've really hit this hard because we know that to help schools and campuses work smarter and make informed decisions, data has to be a part of it. So I always say that data is your objective information to go with your opinion and your viewpoints as subjective, mixing those things in together to say it's not just a gut feeling. Here's the numbers to back it up. This is the story in a graph or a pivot chart or some other way to say it's not just me walking in with my opinion. I've got what it takes to back it up. And we were seeing that about a third of the people we surveyed last year were familiar with business intelligence, but 2/3 of them were saying, well, we kind of understand what you're saying, but we got to have it. We're getting pressured for more reports. There's an increased demand for being able to report and trend and analyze what it is that we're dealing with because we need to make the most out of what little bit of budget we've got. So doing more with less is based on these visuals that are coming out. Now, when you're looking at some of these business intelligence items, some of the key terms you'll hear, benchmark is something that we'll see people talk about that it's basically a reference point. So benchmarks and KPIs are a little bit different. Benchmark was a term that we've always heard. KPI is something that's fairly new on this horizon for a lot of people in education. So benchmark is essentially a reference point. It's valuable on the internal level as well as the external level. KPIs are both as well, but they're an extension of that. Having a black and white picture as a benchmark, that's a black and white picture of your facts and your figures. Very invaluable. And you want to measure that against what other people are working with. So what are they dealing with? What are their rates? What are their scenarios? KPIs are metrics, and we look at these to track factors that run our organization. What is it behind the scenes, these numbers and trends that are essential to our operations? Could be around processes, could be around functions, but they're really essential to reach performance goals. So break that word down or that term down. They're key as in essential about how we perform, and they're indicating how we perform. So that's why the term KPI is coming in, is that benchmarks and KPIs do work together, but there is a difference between the two. Now, they work together to help schools identify waste, any adjustments that may be needed. We're looking at this as it's very dynamic. So when you were running a report to a PDF, as soon as you hit print or hit send, that PDF becomes stagnant. Business intelligence is live. It's something that I can go to a website and pull up live data. Worst case, it's probably a week old, but it's going to be changing because something has happened within that week. So looking at where these things are dynamically happening, being able to filter this information down to say, well, let me pick these 3 buildings and these graphs shift immediately to let me know, well, that building is slightly different than the overall scale. That cost per work order completely went up compared to everyone, or our cost per student is completely down, or our percentage rates are slightly different. So looking at these operational dashboards, we'll see that people might say, we've seen a 20% reduction in equipment downtime or a 28.3% increase in productivity. And when you can put a point behind a number, that's when it gets really impressive.